Greetings, Dennis Fair, retired member of the Metropolitan Police Department of Washington, D.C., serving 29 years straight, retiring June the 8th of 2019. Any opinion and comment I give are strictly coming directly from me. I'm not affiliated with any law enforcement agency. Also, I always try to open with this because you never know. Somebody could be watching for the first time. If somebody has obviously heard this multiple times, if you watched my videos more than once, just kind of like, close your ears if it gets old to hear it every time. But I'm going to discuss police reform and also the whole defund the police movement. I'm going to go into that a little bit. When you think of defunding the police department, of course, that was a slogan that was really pushed heavy with the situation with George Floyd. Defunding the police basically is summarized as taking funds from a police department, law enforcement agency, and giving those funds to other agencies like mental health. For example, if you have a situation where you have mental health, I'll give you an example. Mental health consumers, a lot of times, the police are normally called. They do have mental health. For example, in Washington, D.C., you got the CPAP down at D.C. General, the old D.C. General, rather. That particular agency will come out sometimes. Good luck, and I'm telling you, good luck from a law enforcement perspective, because in most cases, they don't come out. During winter months, the CPAP is normally out for mental consumers. That's what they call them now, versus mental patients or whatever you want to call it. Someone suffering from a mental issue that may be a harm to themselves. For example, an individual that's out in the cold, if it's 20 degrees or 10 degrees, a lot of times they would come out. Of course, they got overtime for coming out, and they would normally come in the downtown area. Now, they were selective on the areas that they came into. They would normally come down to Constitution Avenue. Individuals that were sleeping on the grates and things of that nature, they would come and try to get them to go to a shelter, what have you. If the individuals refused to go to the shelter, they would prepare a PD-12. That's basically when you committing them, FD-12, a regular FD-12. You're actually committing them to the mental facility at DC General, which is CPAP. Now, once they fill out that FD-12, that's basically can be reversed. They've got to go. Now, what happens once they do that? Who do you think they call? The police. So when you call the police, of course, the police wagon pulls up. This individual, obviously, depending on the circumstances, may have some type of schizophrenia or some type of mental health issue or some type of situation where they're not really 100% there. So obviously, if a police patrol wagon with police biggest day on it and two uniform officers get out to assist them, which of course I brought this up in roll call prior to retirement, and I advised them this wasn't a good idea to have the police. They should have their own funding, and they should have individuals that are trained to come out. Although we are trained, but if this is not a criminal situation, why are we coming out to assist them, forcing them into a police transport to take them to CPAP to be committed because they don't want to go to a shelter? A lot of these individuals are in good mental state, meaning that they don't want to go to the shelter. They can survive 20 degrees, 15 degrees. They can do it. But the thing is, by law, if they feel that they are a danger to themselves, and what has happened prior to that, some individuals were found dead the next day during the cold seasons when it got down into the teens. Some individuals actually died. Actually died from the cold weather. So to cover themselves, they actually commit them and make them go to the CPAP. And it's kind of a violation of their rights in a sense, because you force them to go. And then I've talked to some of the individuals, in the past that actually have good sound mind. They'll tell you, officer, hey, look, it's nothing against you, but I don't want to go to a shelter. I say, what's going on? Why don't you want to go to a shelter? You don't want to get out of the elements? He said, officer, let me tell you something. He said, in the shelter, it's like being in jail. He said, there's a sexual assaults in the shelter. He said, there's rape. He says, if you have any property, you can't really go to sleep because they steal your property. He said, officer, the streets are cleaner than these shelters. I was like, wow. So the shelters, he advised me a lot of times that they have lice, all types of rodents, and everybody is not in the same mental state that's in a shelter. Some individuals just like me or you, they have common sense or whatever they're talking. They just have ran upon a situation that put them in a bind where they may be homeless. Everybody that's homeless, a lot of times individuals stereotype them as being, some type of criminal or vagrant or what have you. I came across a homeless individual that actually had a degree in mathematics. Now me, I'm gonna tell you, mathematics is like kryptonite to me. You know what I'm saying? That's not my thing. I mean, basic math, of course, but when you start talking calculus and all that, hey, look, I'm trying to leave as quick as possible. I want no parts of it. But this individual had a degree in mathematics, and obviously, a degree in mathematics is not an easy accomplishment. The individual told me basically, he started drinking, and one thing led to another. His wife eventually divorced him. He just fell on hard times. He lost his job and started experimenting with different substances, and that landed him in the street, and that's why I never stereotype, although a lot of officers do, and a lot of regular everyday citizens do the same. When you see somebody homeless, don't assume that individual is just a bottom of the barrel type individual. Some of these individuals have more education than you can imagine, and more education than you in most cases. Obviously, he had more education than me because I dropped out of college to pursue my career in law enforcement. I was a dropout, a college dropout. But this individual had a degree in math and was talking just like I'm talking right now, extremely intelligent. And that was one of my pet peeves. I would talk to him a lot of times just to, see where their temperature was, what I'm saying, see where their mindset was. And some individuals obviously would just start talking crazy to the point where you didn't understand, and maybe that was a method to just get you away from them or a deterrent or whatever. Some individuals, like I said, will have regular conversations just like we're talking, and they fell on hard times. Easily it could be you or me. It just depends on the circumstances. Some individuals just simply fall on hard times, but the forcing them to go to institution because they don't want to come out of the code, it's kind of borderline violating their rights. You telling them that they have to go, and then they go to these locations, and a lot of times they have so many different belongings. We can't take that stuff. A lot of times we as police officers would advise. Some officers didn't know any better, so they took it. We don't transport any property like that because we don't know what's in the property. So obviously in those cases, when you do that, you can't transport this individual or really and search them. You're really not even supposed to handcuff them because they're not under arrest. So it's a tricky situation. If you want to handcuff them, if they want to be handcuffed, they don't mind being handcuffed. Okay, some officers were really paranoid and scary. So some of the young officers that really didn't deal with the streets on a regular were a little paranoid, and it's a case-by-case thing. But in reality, you're not supposed to handcuff them. You're basically supposed to transfer them. You really can't even search them because they're not under arrest. Now, mind you, you're dealing with some individuals that you really don't know their mental state. So at any point, this individual can pull out a knife or a gun or anything and just go wild because you haven't searched them and you don't know what their mind state is. You don't know what's going to happen once they get in the back of the wagon or the patrol transport vehicle. Anything can happen. They could just, that closed off environment and those cages, and they could just trigger them into an experience they had negative with the police. So it's a real tricky situation, but we didn't transport the property because a lot of times the property that most individuals that are homeless have is everything from their entire life. So a lot of times you might see an individual with a shopping cart full of all types of various items. A lot of times you might look at it as trash, but a lot of times these individuals, it's everything that they have. And I know that there was a individual, I believe, was arrested or his property was recovered years ago. This individual had $10,000 in one of those bags in cash. Basically, it was his life savings or what have you, but you wouldn't have never known that. Everybody that's homeless, you can't stereotype. Every situation is different. But we didn't normally transport, at least I didn't, and the officers I worked with, because a lot of times these belongings have rodents. They have all types of bugs and insects and lice, especially in regular months when it's not cold. Obviously, lice and things like that are not necessarily going to live in those types of environments, but rat and things of that nature, mice can get into that property and basically build a whole nest inside it, because this individual was on the street 24/7 in the same area on the grate. So obviously, if a rat, mice, or whatever type of rodent can find a real warm place, that's where they're going to be. And guess what? We put that property inside of a patrol wagon, and we got to transport other individuals, and they get licensed. And then that puts the police department in a legal situation to be sued, because you had an individual with lice in here, and then my client got in there for DUI, and now he's got lice, or he got bit by a rat that was under the seat. Obviously the officer didn't see it, but these are things that happen when they are actually doing the patrol. The mental CPAP individuals come out only on cold nights, extremely cold nights, when they open up the warming center and things like that. Now, granted, they do not come out in hot months. Like, for example, if it's extremely hot, they don't come out. I worked some temperatures at night that were just so hot. Sometimes at nighttime, a few times, I looked at the temperature, and it was like 90-something degrees at night. But they don't come out. A lot of these individuals still have coats on and things like that. They're suffering mentally. Now, in their mind, they're not hot, but they're still, a lot of times sweating, and they can actually have a heat stroke. But for whatever reason, the staff does not come out during summer months. So it's kind of hypocritical. It would be nice with the whole defunding the police. It kind of makes sense, but then again, it doesn't make sense. They're talking about, when you talk about defunding, you want to remove money from the police department, a law enforcement agency, and put it in a facility like mental health or something else that won't take up police department's resources and things like that. The only problem with that is when you start playing with money and moving money around from law enforcement agencies, which if it's done right, it could be done, but you can't take money from an organization and for law enforcement, police, and then put it into another organization and then shorten that organization. Because if you shorten, for example, if you take money from the police department, law enforcement agency, and you transfer it to, let's say, a mental health situation where they can supposedly come out and versus having the police respond to some of these mental health situations, that's good. But a lot of times, and I've spoken with some of the officers, they're supposed to come out, but a lot of times when you're given the dispatch and information, the people at the mental health facility at CPAP want to know all types of details. Is this a situation where an individual is violent? And if it's a situation where the individual is violent, guess what? They don't come. The police, they want the police to come. And a lot of times if they get there and it turns violent, or if they feel like it's going to get violent, they have the police respond. So either way, the police still come. And a lot of times they deliberately, they know the classifications as far as what they don't have to respond to. So there are a lot of times where real officers in to say something that will basically have them in a situation where they don't have to respond. They'll ask, is the individual this? Well, what about this? Is the individual that? Is the individual this? Well, no, we don't handle cases like that. Basically, a lot of times in those cases, they have a way to get out of coming out. Now, granted, they are getting paid to respond, but a lot of times, based on the scenario, they won't respond. If the individual is somewhat being belligerent and hostile, they still want the police there just to be on standby. And I get it, because these individuals from the mental health are not armed. And I get that. But on the same note, you're talking about removing resources from the police agency to give to them, and then they still don't come out, and the police still end up coming out. So when you remove these resources from law enforcement, what happens is, you obviously, if you're taking, it's going to be some shorts somewhere else. And I'm going to tell you where those shorts end up happening. Recruiting, training, and all types of other things. Of course, overtime and things like that will fall, but the most significant hit is the resources for training. And you know, a lot of times you don't have people to come in and teach things like the training as far as having individuals come out with something they used to do. They would have individuals from the community come out and speak to officers and tell officers specifically, hey, you know, this is what we don't like about police. And you'd have the officers participate and say, hey, well, this is what we don't like about you guys. When we come out, you know, all the after police, that's not even necessary. We're coming out just for a call for service, and everybody on the porch screaming after police, and we just getting out of the car. What is all that for? So those types of scenarios when you would have citizens come in and speak and police, sometimes they get a little hostile, but it never got out of control. You got to specifically talk to individuals and engage. And then you have individuals from the gay. Well, back in the day, it was the gay liaison unit, but now it's LGBT or whatever. But they add that to it, and they would come out and explain, what they don't like or what they wished would happen, and you could just have some dialogue. They don't do that anymore. They don't have that. It's like they're afraid to have the citizens come out and voice their opinion. And a lot of times, without the proper training, you have officers that are not from these areas. And like I said, with the whole defund the police, guess what? You defund the police, you're going to see a shortage in hiring and things of this nature. Like, for example, this is not so much of defunding, but during COVID, you had a whole year, no police officers went in the academy. A whole year. Just let that sink in. Now, even though there was COVID, the NFL, NBA, or whatever, there's always new players drafted. The draft doesn't stop, and it didn't stop. You can't go a whole year without bringing new people in, as far as whether it be sports or law enforcement. Law enforcement obviously is much more critical. You don't bring law enforcement officers in for a whole year, you can never catch up. You can never ever catch up. And right now they're trying to get a certain amount of officers, and as last time I checked, the city council, what have you, did not approve the certain request or whatever, but they did support a certain amount of officers, and I believe cadets. But unfortunately, they have last time I checked, they were 300. It's probably much more than that. I would say probably between 4 to 5 now. They were 300 behind last time I checked with officers that had left, retired, resigned, or were terminated. So it's pretty critical right now. That's why if you look at not just DC, law enforcement in general right now, with the whole defund the policeman movement, the cancel culture, and it's just not working. A lot of individuals are not pursuing this as a career anymore, and I can understand it. But on the same note, a lot of individuals are getting out of the career as quick as they can. They're just changing occupations or going to other departments where there's not as much stress. Sometimes these individuals go to little small towns where there's maybe like a few officers, and those officers get respect. It's not like a great big city where every time you go to a scene, you got 1,000 different people taunting you, saying crazy stuff to you for no reason. And if you get used to it after a period of time, it just doesn't really mean anything. It almost becomes normal. But some officers are not really good with dealing with that. Some officers are not stable mentally, as crazy as that may sound. You have some officers, depending on their family circumstances or what goes on outside of the department, they come to work with stress. You can't take off every time you're tired. You just don't have that kind of leave. If you've been in court all day, or you might have had a situation where you had to deal with your child screwing up in school or something like that, you can take off, but a lot of times, depending on the situation, there's no break, there's no time out, because a lot of times leave is restricted. And based on the current circumstances, you can't take off exactly when you want to. I just recently spoke with one of the officers from MPD that told me during the situation was current with Russia, along with the convoy, their leave was restricted. So he had to work a total, I think, of 12 days straight. Now, mind you, these 12 days straight are 10 hours, 10-hour shifts or more. So with no breaks, 10-hour shifts for 12 days straight is a lot. Now, there are some people that do this every day, and I'm not going to discredit them or, not give them their credit, because it's work regardless. But 10 hours, 12 days straight in law enforcement is work, because in most of the time, most cases, you're not just sitting there. These are actual situations where you have to be on the detail. You're actually standing, you're actually sitting, and a lot of times it may be some downtime, but sitting for prolonged long periods of time takes its toll on your joints, and especially sciatica and things of that nature and other problems. You actually will experience back problems and things like that, especially with the belt and depending on what type of shape you in, it takes its toll on your body, So these things are something you have to take into consideration, but you can't just snap your finger and take off. Of course, you could call in sick, and depending on that, if it's a situation where sick leave is has a lot of situations where, for example, depending on if it's a specific detail, you can't just call in sick, or take an optional where it gives you 3 days. You can do that, but if it's a detail, that means if you call in sick, you got to go to the Metropolitan Police Department's fire and police clinic the very next business day. And of course, in most of the time, if you decide to call in on a Friday and you figure you're gonna go Monday, a lot of times if it's a major detail, the police clinic is open on Saturdays. So you have to go there and for the sick call, and you have to go in uniform, depending on if it's a detail. If it's a detail, you are required to go in full uniform, which of course is lunacy, because naturally if you go in uniform, a lot of times, if you are actually sick with all that stuff on, 9 times out of 10, your blood pressure may be elevated, or whatever your condition is, it's going to be a little more harsh with an entire uniform on. They do that to deter you from going sick, but like I said, it's a little bit of a lunacy with it. They're more concerned with manpower than they are with health. They think that most people are doing it, just doing it to, abuse the sick system. And some people do that, but there are actually people that get sick that have actual conditions that they need to call in. Unfortunately, they get caught up with that. They have to go in uniform. Doesn't matter how you feel. You got to put that whole uniform in that belt and go to that police clinic. And a lot of times, depending on the doctors, they'll have you return to work. And that's not really... The doctors at the police and fire clinic have the interests of the Metropolitan Police Department. They're not really, I don't call them real doctors. And a lot of times, I'll give you a quick example. One time I went to the police and fire clinic, and a doctor, she was a female doctor. And I don't even recall exactly what I was there for, but she solicited me for her own practice. She actually, I think... pediatrician. I think she dealt with children, if I recall correctly. But because my daughter was a young then, and she had inquired about me. We were having small talk, and she asked me, I think she advised me she was at Providence Hospital if I was interested in coming to her, practice or whatever. She has no problem with that. Which you're not supposed to do that. Obviously you're working for the Metropolitan Police Department. We're supposed to be dealing with my situation, not telling me about your practice. But most of the doctors, at least they were not actually specialists in, for example, knees and things like that. You might have sprained your knee chasing a prison or something, but the individual is basically a generic doctor working part-time there, and they may not have any experience in knees or anything like that, but they're seeing you. A lot of times, blood pressure, you go there, your blood pressure is high, but you may go to your regular physician and it's low, but a lot of times they use... thigh cuffs. They don't use thigh cuffs. If you have fairly large arms, a lot of times it's not going to be accurate. And a lot of these blood pressure machines haven't been calibrated or any of that. When I spoke to my doctor, he told me, he said, no, we don't use those machines. We do it the manual way, where they squeeze the thing and do it that way with your pulse and all that. They actually do it the real way. The only thing with that is time consuming. We have 1 million police officers coming in. No one has time to really do it that way. Unfortunately, these machines a lot of times are not accurate and haven't been calibrated. And I know for a fact, if the police clinic is run somewhat or half of the way the police department is run, they haven't been calibrated. Trust me. And that's just how it is. Sometimes we would have vehicles on the lot that needed oil changes, and that time had passed, and for whatever reason the oil wasn't changed. But going back into it, these individuals often go to these, police clinics and things of that nature, and thinking that these doctors have their best interests at hand, and they don't. And with the whole defunding, you don't have the proper staff a lot of times at these particular clinics, or they're not really doctors. I know one time one doctor was practicing years ago. This is when the police clinic was in Southwest by the Academy and Blue Plains. The doctor's license had expired and everything, but he was still working at the police and fire clinic. So there's been all types of situations where the doctors are not actually valid as far as their license, or they're just not, professional and don't have the police departments interests in hand. They have the police department interest in hand. They don't have the officer's actual personal interest. Like, I may go in there with this problem, they treat me generic, and the next person might go in there with another problem, treated generic. It's no personal professional towards one individual. It's just more like, everybody's the same. It's almost like what it basically is, a clinic, a free clinic. And that's the way they treat you a lot of times. It's no professionalism. A lot of times the individuals that work there don't really have a personality. It's, and obviously some officers are very unprofessional as well and going there with the attitude, depending on how they're feeling or what have you. But the thing about it is, when you start dealing with defunding the police department, the citizens are ultimately affected. It sounds good, defund the police. I saw a lot of T-shirts and slogans. Half the people that really pushed that narrative didn't even know what it meant. And the sad thing is, the ones that pushed it would ultimately be the ones affected. When they defund the police and do cuts, and you don't have a certain amount of officers on the street, like right now in D.C., a lot of times, depending on the particular amount of manpower on a particular shift, one shooting can take that whole shift out of service, depending on if the shell casings are in multiple locations. Like if you have a running gunfight, for example, if you got individuals just straight shooting at each other back and forth, they're running, or if there's a drive-by, and individual does a drive-by and he's shooting from a car that's moving, and the other individuals are shooting back. Those bullets are going everywhere. For every bullet that's found that goes somewhere, somebody got to go to that scene and stand by that bullet until a mobile crime comes in, picks it up. And a lot of times, depending on what's going on in the city, they'll put you on the list. They'll tell you right now, be advised, we're working the shooting in 6D. Now, you might be in 4D. They'll tell you we got 1 or 2 crime scene search officers working, a mobile crime working. Depending on what particular day it is, there are times when those individuals actually are not available at all, because whatever happens, the timing is just perfectly imperfect. That means those individuals at the mobile crime go sick or whatever, and they absolutely have no one working. So what happens is you have a reserve crime scene search officer from a district that a lot of times will step up. That's an officer that's been trained to do exactly what mobile crime does. The thing about that is, you got this officer that might be working in 3D. He's got to go all the way to 6D. Now, after he finished 6D, 7D just had a shooting. They need a crime scene. This officer's going to be running all day, because he might be, depending, which is very rare, he might be the only crime scene search certified officer in all 7 districts. Now, what happens a lot of times is you'll have officers that are certified that won't answer up, and the dispatcher doesn't have the certification on the roll call, which they're supposed to submit when they do each roll call, all the officer certifications, so nobody will, stay hidden under the rock. Because some officers are just lazy and do absolutely nothing. Although they take the training, they want to take the training to get away from the district and get off the streets. But when it's time to actually apply that training, a lot of them don't. They rather not answer up. So a lot of times they come over the air. We need a crime scene search certified officer to respond to 6D. They got multiple shell casings, and officers, you hit crickets. Nobody answers up. And then they'll go to another district. And a lot of times, depending on how sharp the officials are, the officials will actually go over the roll call and say, raise Officer Jackson. Jackson certified. Jackson, respond to so-and-so, so-and-so. And a lot of times, depending on the official, sometimes they'll make them write a statement why you didn't answer. Now, of course, the officer a lot of times will say, I didn't hear it. Then you got to write a statement as to why you weren't monitoring the radio. And you can get jammed up on that, because you're supposed to hear that. You're not on an assignment. Why didn't you hear it? Now, obviously, if you're on assignment, something's going on, that's somewhat can be justified. But if you're not on a current assignment, they check your run sheet as far as what you were doing at the time, and you don't have anything documented, you're supposed to have heard that call come out, or you heard it, you just acted like you didn't hear it. And that's what a lot of officers do. But the defunding sounds good to, the people that's really got a beef with law enforcement. It sounds good, but the thing is, when they defund the law enforcement or police, ultimately, most of those individuals are the ones that are affected. Now, with me, am I affected? Of course, like anyone else. I'm a DC resident. I need police services depending on the scenario. If I have a crime where my vehicle's broken into, what have I need that, but I'm also a licensed gun carrier anywhere in the United States. So it's not a conceal and carry for me. It's a totally different situation. I can carry a weapon anywhere in the United States because of my prior law enforcement. Now, on that level, I'm somewhat protected. I feel a little at ease because I can obviously handle a weapon, and most of the time, I got the weapon with me 24/7, wherever I'm out of the house, of course. If I'm going to the grocery store, I take it. It was a time where depending on where I went, I wouldn't take it, but because of the whole defunding, and I know for a fact what's actually on the street, especially in DC, there's a very, very thin amount of officers on the streets in Washington, DC. And not to mention with COVID, the court systems were shut down. And currently, you have a lot of pending cases, a lot of homicide cases that are pending that have not been indicted yet because of the whole COVID situation. Individuals, a lot of times, weren't able to get a grand jury because if one person on the grand jury got COVID, then the whole grand jury was tainted and had to quarantine. So in most times, now it might have changed now during the COVID, there was only 2 grand juries. And 2 grand juries compared to the individuals as far as the crime and the homicides and the shootings, that's absolutely nothing. So there are a lot of cases and individuals that are actually still in jail pending court. Now, obviously, you got a right to a speedy trial, and obviously a good attorney is going to stress, my client has been in jail for 2 years. Why is it that, he hasn't been indicted? He's just sitting there. But because of COVID and things of that nature, you don't have a choice. But with the defunding, you also don't have the manpower a lot of times to patrol these areas. And with the council culture, a lot of officers aren't doing anything. And I've spoken to some of them. They just tell me a lot of times, and I'm talking about MPD officers. Can't speak on PG County or other, but for the most part, this is citywide. This is United States wide. Law enforcement officers a lot of times are doing the bare minimum or less than that. Because why go out of your way to do something and the next thing you know, you're indicted? Now, obviously, with the George Floyd situation, should have been indicted. That was clearly a murder. But you got other individuals, obviously, if you have to put your hands on someone to pull them out of the wagon or put them in a transport, you got individuals saying he's not getting in. You got to go hands on. It's not pretty. I always say there's nothing attractive about law enforcement. It gets ugly. It gets real ugly. So obviously somebody filming you pushing this individual into the wagon or snatching this individual out, dragging him by his feet because he said he wasn't coming out, it doesn't look good to public view. It doesn't look good to a civilian or your average citizen that's not really familiar with law enforcement. So of course you're gonna get that cancel culture. You're gonna get the filming. So the first thing they're gonna do, well, why do you have to drag him out by his legs? The individual said he wasn't coming out of the transport. Now obviously, if you say you're not coming out of the transport, it's not a situation where you're going to sit and wait. Individual tells you he's not coming out, somebody's going to have to go get him. And guess who's going to do it? One of the officers or 2 of the officers. Some of the officers are even reluctant to do that now. They don't know what to do. A lot of times they'll call an official to the scene when it's basically your job to go in there and get him. You use the minimum amount of force necessary. Obviously, you don't go in there and just beat him to death with a ass, which is the iron expandable, like a nightstick, but it's expandable, but it's for the most part iron, and it can do some severe damage. You're not going to do that. You're not going to pull out your gun and shoot him and then drag him out. That's excessive, and you would be criminally charged. But individual tells you he's not getting in the transport, and it's not a legitimate reason like claustrophobic or something like that. Guess what? You got to put him in there, or you got to go get him. It's going to be hands on, and it's not going to be pretty. If he's kicking or whatever, you got to deal with that. Or if she is swinging or spitting, you got to deal with that. It gets real ugly. But the thing about it is a lot of officers don't even want to partake in doing their job because on video, and then once it makes the news, the next thing you know, the mayor's speaking to Chief Conti and saying, I don't like the way that looked. And the chief, he's in a political position. I did work with him at the 2nd District. He's a very nice guy. I can say that. But as far as working relationship, I've never worked with him on the street. He was a sergeant when he was at the 2nd District. So I don't really know too much about him as far as his work ethic as far as policing. But when it comes down to things like that, he's pretty much a go along, get along type individual. And obviously, you got the mayor over his head with pretty much a hatchet ready to cut his head off if he says the wrong thing. So naturally, even some things officers do that are right, if it doesn't look right, Chief Conti or a lot of the management in high positions are going to concur with the mayor, or, the officer shouldn't have did that. Maybe they could have did it this way. And in reality, in some of the stuff, you can't do it another way. It's no other way to do it. I mean, for example, Chief Conti was highly upset with I think they punched it. One of the officers punched the individual that wouldn't put his hands behind his back. The individual had a gun in his waistband. Had he got to that gun and fired those officers up with that gun, it would have been basically somebody handing the officer's family a nice crisp flag. I'd rather deal with the consequences of punching this guy that's got a gun in his waistband than worrying about what Chief Conti thinks. Now, that's just me. Again, my opinion is my opinion. Now, I'll go along with certain things with law enforcement and certain things I won't go along with. And just like with citizens, certain things with the citizens I go along with, certain things I won't. With the whole defund, you got to know specifically what that really details. A lot of individuals, like I say, scream and defund the police. Yeah, it's fun to scream that until the next thing you know, you got a bunch of officers from somewhere else that don't know nothing about your neighborhood, that don't care about your neighborhood, and the next thing you know, the same thing is going on. You're getting pretty much abused in your own neighborhoods. The individuals that should come to the academy and speak with law enforcement and have dialogue within service training, that's no longer possible because it's been defunded. They don't have the money to do that. So instead of doing the training that should be done, which they're lacking big time, I can speak for MPD, the training is lacking big time. There's no more training. For example, I'll give you an example. And a lot of people don't give this thought. With the Metropolitan Police Department, there's a LGBT unit liaison. There's a Hispanic Latino liaison. There's an Asian liaison, and this is cool, and it's no problem with that. And there are other liaisons, but there is no African American liaison. Now, obviously, a lot of times individuals, when you think about this, that's somewhat a little weird because in most cases, the other ethnicities a lot of times don't have the problems a lot of times that African Americans have with law enforcement. But you have to ask yourself, and I've asked this question before, nobody can answer it. Why is there no African American, or if you want to call it black or whatever, why is there no African American liaison? Obviously, they have more situations. Obviously, the back and forth with law enforcement. There's a lot of individual type situations where sometimes it's actually the citizens, they create the problem, and sometimes it's actually law enforcement. That's why you need sometimes these types of liaisons, just like you got for everything else. Why is there no African Americans? See, these are questions that I asked in reference to this that nobody can answer. I also reached out to the violence interrupters because I wanted to know specifically, what do they do? And what is their job title? What do they get paid? No response. I emailed Charles Allen. I emailed him in reference to the, I think they have a, what do you call it? They have an actual group for police reform. They basically supposedly watch over the law enforcement to be sure everything is going right and there's no type of, what's the word I want to use? It's really a committee that just overlooks. I'm trying to think of the name of it, but it's a group, and I wanted to know who picked this group out. And come to find out, I think the mayor and Charles Allen, these are hand-picked individuals that, for the most part, deal with the law enforcement as far as reform and watching and supposedly monitoring MPD. But they're hand-picked, and if I'm not mistaken, one of the high-ranking commanders from MPD is on. Now, how do you have a high-ranking commander on the committee that oversees MPD? Obviously, it's going to be biased. So I emailed and I was questioned as to what does it take? No response. Because I don't feel that I'm biased. I know and specifically can discuss the details of what's wrong with the Metropolitan Police Department, what could help, as far as training and things of that nature. But of course, I got no response. These individuals are handpicked, and you got a lot of individuals that are friends with the mayor or friends with Charles Allen. So it's a buddy system. It's not really so much about correcting the issue. It's more or less about putting something in place so that, it looks kind of good. So you can't say we didn't do nothing. We got some people watching MPD, but those people are basically MPD. And you got other individuals, they came up with some stuff that they came up with different types of situations that they felt that this should change, but they don't have anyone that's really unbiased. Me, I'm unbiased. I'm no longer affiliated with the Metropolitan Police Department. Regardless, my check is going to come every month. I have nothing to gain or nothing to lose. I'm going to call it like I see it, whether it's right or wrong. If an officer is right or something should change, I'm going to say it. If something shouldn't change, I'm going to say it. I'm going to stick with my opinion. But when you talk about reform, you're talking about things that are going to affect training. The training is already watered down. You don't have any individuals for the community to come to these academies to get to talk or any of that. Some of these individuals, and I got no problem saying, some of these individuals that they're recruiting now have never, ever been into any form of urban environment. And to basically translate that, some of these individuals haven't been in black neighborhoods. Some of these individuals have no knowledge or haven't really seen an actual black neighborhood or Hispanic neighborhood or any of that, only on TV, because a lot of them are from little towns where they may be a very low amount of other ethnicities other than white or whatever. So it depends on the individual officer. So when you get these officers, a lot of times from other areas, sometimes it doesn't matter, but a lot of times it does. A lot of these individuals come into these neighborhoods scared. They come into these neighborhoods biased based on what they've heard or seen on television, and they treat these individuals, they mistreat individuals based on their culture. And you can't do that, and it's so bad as far as funding, as far as bringing new officers on, as far as in this area, they're now trying to establish recruiting in New York. Now, when you start putting advertisements on the New York subway, you have hit rock bottom, because there was a time when you couldn't even get into the facilities. I think they used to have it at Dunbar High School to take the MPD test, or at the academy. You couldn't even take the test. Now, they're struggling to get even people eligible. As far as Chicago, for example, Chicago, and what I've read is the police department is now doing so bad as far as bringing new officers aboard and struggling with manpower. They are now dropping I believe it's the associate degree on a case-by-case basis, depending. Now, I don't know what they use to do that. I don't know how you could say, well, okay, you don't have to have a college degree, but this individual needs it. But it's my understanding that they are dropping that because of low recruitment. So they're lowering the standards to get more officers. Honestly, do you need any type of college education to be in law enforcement? You don't. You really don't. You can do it with basic common sense. It's a lot that goes into it, a lot of discipline and what have you, but you can actually do it without that. But the recruitment is doing so bad, they actually have Metropolitan Police Department signs on New York subway. That's how bad it is. And this summer, and I'll say this summer is going to be a violent pandemic. They're having shootings a lot of times that don't really, they're not really publicized on the media or the news because it's an ongoing thing now. And unfortunately, a shooting in 7th District or 6th District, something on Benning Road versus Georgetown, unfortunately, it's not going to make the news. Now, a shooting on M Street, obviously, there was a shooting not too long ago where an individual, I believe, was shot in the head in the 3200 block of M Street. That's the heart of Georgetown. And I think this was between 4 and 5 o'clock, which in the 90s, in my era, virtually impossible to get away because there was so many police. And for the most part, the officers knew the areas that you would take to get out of the city. Obviously, you shoot somebody in 3200 block of M Street. To get out of the city, you got to take the Key Bridge, or maybe you got to jump on the Parkway, Southwest Freeway, or you can take Connecticut to Military, jump on Military, be back in 4D, or you can take the high road and take Wisconsin Avenue or Connecticut all the way back to Maryland, which I don't recommend, because obviously a good officer is going to notify Maryland of the lookout of the vehicle, and Maryland don't play for the most part. But now Maryland, a lot of times, depending on where you are, it's like the 8th district. You look in areas of Maryland, their violence is just like DC. Every time you turn on TV, somebody is getting killed in Maryland. So it was a time when Maryland was a little bit safer. Depending on where you are in Maryland, it's basically the 8th district. So a lot of individuals did move to areas of Maryland that are now is just as violent as DC. But the recruiting situation has become such a problem that they're offering incentives to living. They'll help you with your housing, everything in Washington, D.C. They're hiring cadets. I mean, it's great money for a cadet if that's something you want to do, because you're not going to make that kind of money and still be able to, be a officer after everything is finished and you complete the requirements. You're going to make good money in school, but a lot of kids now and young people don't want to do it because law enforcement is frowned upon. I don't want to be high. I don't want to be the man, you the feds or whatever. Well, yeah, I can understand that if that's your own thought. But listening to somebody else tell you that is kind of stupid. You basically being peer pressured and they're not pursuing something that in the back of your mind, you be like, man, maybe I wouldn't mind being a police officer. I'm qualified. I've never been arrested. I could do that. But then your friends like, man, why would you want to do something like that? That's hot. That's hot. The same individuals a lot of times are putting this in your mind because they can't do it. Some of these individuals has criminal history, or they are addicted to marijuana. They gotta smoke weed every single day. They don't have discipline. The thing is, when you do dismiss this as a career, guess who enters the academy? A bunch of individuals that don't look like you, don't know you, have no relation to your neighborhood, and a lot of them, not all, some of them can come to the city and be unbiased, but a lot of them don't live in this area, so they don't really care about this area. It's just a job. I came across a whole lot of individuals like that. So when you see these individuals that are recruited from areas that are nowhere near this area, and a lot of times these individuals are so poorly trained, they don't even know the slang. They don't know the slang. That's not something they teach you in the police academy. They don't teach you professionalism. That's another thing with the defunding. They already don't teach this. They didn't teach this with funding. So with defunding, you can imagine how low the standards will go as far as training. And that's what I'm focused on. When you defund a law enforcement agency, they'll come up with ways like, well, look, we would, but we don't have the money to train. We got to put this money towards overtime. We only got this amount now because you took that money and gave it to the mental health ward. You did this with that, So it's a tricky situation to be in, but if you don't have proper training, you got individuals that have no professionalism. They don't know how to talk to citizens. They don't know how to deflate the situation. Individuals don't even know the basic slang. A lot of times you get to the scene and somebody's shot, this individual is screaming and pretty much kirking out. You have to take into consideration this individual is traumatized. So you can't be as super hostile with the individual that just witnessed a shooting or that's his loved one laying there bleeding out. And a lot of citizens don't understand because they won't have the citizens come to the academy to talk and to have actual exchange of dialect and anything like that. Because if you bring some of these citizens to the academy and do some type of in-service training where they allow them to come out if they want to come, and there are a lot of citizens that would like to come and talk to officers and ask questions. A lot of times you got a situation where there's an individual shot. I'm using this as an example. It's a homicide. The individual has been pronounced. The DC Fire Department have came out and declared this individual is deceased. At that point, the individual is not going to be moved. The body is not going to be moved. Now, that's extremely traumatizing to an individual that has no type of knowledge of why this is taking place. All you know is that's your friend, your loved one, could be your child, laying there and they're not moving. So in your mind, naturally, what are you going to do? You will lose your mind because you want your child off that sidewalk. You can see the blood streaming down the sidewalk. A lot of times you will see that. That's not something that they cover up. They will nowadays, they have the tents. Like if you go to athletic sporting event, the pop-up tents. They have a black one. A lot of times, medical examiner has it, and it'll have Metropolitan Police Department. But that's basically to take the place of the old sheet or whatever and things like that. And they basically work. But regardless of that, that's still your loved one laying on the sidewalk, covered up. And basically, there's nothing. They try to actually put a more of a block off the area and create a perimeter where you can't get that close to see the blood streaming down the sidewalk. But a lot of times, this visual is hit in the main artery. Blood will actually run down the sidewalk. There have been some situations where the blood has actually ran down the sidewalk into a drain. That is a horrific scene to see, even if you see it on a regular basis, if you've been doing it for a long time as a law enforcement officer. But put yourself in a situation that's your loved one, or that's somebody you know, or maybe it's not anybody you know. You see this blood running down the sidewalk, and you don't understand, why haven't they moved him? Well, they're not going to move him because it's declared a crime scene. Once that individual has been declared deceased by the fire department, they're not going to move the body. It's no reason to. Take him to the hospital for what? There's no signs of life. When there are no signs of life, at that stage, it becomes a crime scene. And once it's a crime scene, they're not going to move the body until the medical examiner comes out. Detectives, look at the body and process it. And then it will go. Depending on how long it takes the medical examiner to get there, because they may be on some pending, there may be a couple of other shootings in other districts, a couple of other homicides throughout the city. You may only have one working. So guess what? You're going to be out there in that hot sun, and depending on whatever it is, or if it's freezing, you still got to stand there. There is no timeout. Hey, look, I need to go warm up or whatever. That's why a lot of times you see officers out there looking like they're freezing. They are actually freezing, but you can't do anything. You got to hold that crime scene down, because if an officer leaves that scene for a second, that's going to be brought up in a trial if it's found out, because anything can happen when you leave a crime scene. Somebody's supposed to be at that crime scene for the duration, the entire time until it's wrapped up and shut down and the body is gone and all evidence is collected. A lot of times the body is not moved, and these are things that they could do if they had citizens come out and to the academy, or have some officers come and do other things and talk about this versus dancing, push-up challenges, and all types of other foolishness. Now, that's cute and that's cool as far as community. You got your community service officers. That's cool, but when you got a city in this dilemma that it's currently in, and these guys are jumping rope or playing a push-up challenge or racing police cars and doing everything else with police, it's a problem. It's a problem. I got a problem with officers like that. If you want to take pictures, there's another officer that's constantly, female officer that's constantly taking pictures, posting them on Twitter. If you got time to do that, maybe you should attempt to go into modeling, because I don't understand where they had the time to take pictures and post them on Twitter for likes and all that. It's actually a little different department now. That's one of the problems, and the training is not there. And with funding, it wasn't there. But you got a defunding situation there where a lot of the training is just not happening. This is considered, in my era, unprofessional. It's conduct unbecoming. You're sitting there on departmental time, on taxpayers' money, taking selfies in the locker room. And, I've seen some of the comments citizens are making, guys are making, officer, arrest me, and little stuff like that. But that's not what you came to the job to do. Or is it? Because if that's what you're doing, you're wasting tax dollars, and maybe you should choose another occupation like modeling. Now, obviously, modeling in the early stages is not going to pay as well as the police department. I can tell you that. But why waste tax dollars and time when you can actually be doing some police work, or if you're not going to police work, at least monitor the radio and do all that silly stuff when you get off. But they don't have individuals come to these community service groups, or even if you don't have the citizens come to the academy, have some of these detectives come out and talk to these individuals about why they don't move the body. Explain to them that it's a crime scene. That's why the body still stays there and we have to process. A lot of times during these homicides, when this individual is laid there, unfortunately, it's a very horrific scene, bleeding out, depending on if the individual's been shot in the head. It's something straight out of a horror movie. But in most cases, in a lot of cases, there are drugs on these individuals that have been killed. A lot of times, it's a running shootout. The individual, a lot of times, they have been killed, have guns on them. So that gun has to be rendered safe. There have been individuals that have been killed that actually were laying there with their hand on a cocked weapon, like a 38 or something, with the weapon was actually still literally in their hand. So that scene has to be rendered safe before you can move the body, and it has to be processed. Pictures have to be taken. Fingerprints have to be taken. It's not a situation like back in the day where they would actually let you come to the scene and identify the body. And then, you see the family members passing out screaming. They don't do that anymore. You don't identify the body. You don't. That's just not, it's too traumatic, especially if it's a loved one. The average person can't handle that. To see their loved one on the ground, and especially in the condition, if you got an individual that's shot in the face, it's not pretty. And that's the picture that you will go away with. If that is your loved one or a friend or a child of yours, or God forbid, if somebody, that you obviously know, that is the picture that you will go away with, no matter what they do as far as in the funeral home and whatever they do. That picture is going to be tattooed in your mind for the rest of your life. Trust me. So that stopped. The detectives a lot of times are not normally available for a lot of the in-service trainings, and it becomes good when it first started, but they did away with all the citizens involvement. They used to have citizens come out, and voice their opinions, and a lot of people would work. A lot of people wouldn't participate in it if you had it, but some people would. Some people actually had a time to come out, and my thing is, if you do have the citizens come out, why not provide them with the lunch and make it worth their while? Don't just have them come out and voice their opinion. I'm not saying Ruth Chris or anything like that, but have a nice lunch for the citizens to come out and have some dialogue and let the citizens know it's not going to be an arguing match. It's not going to be a cursing match. Remain professional. Not going to be no after police. It's not going to be no after citizens. Act like you got some sense and intelligence and have some dialogue. And it's okay to disagree and have some dialogue. If you don't like the way the police do this, or I want to know why the police do this. I want to know why the police play on their phones in the car on these areas. Why do they sit there and they never get out of the car? A lot of times individuals can tell you, hey, the reason that you see this individual with this particular case, George and Kennedy Street, because that is a mobile stationary detail. Well, they have a mobile vehicle. There's a vehicle there, but they have to stay there for the entire time. Now, what that is, that's basically there for just high visibility. Obviously, the officer's not going to really do anything, but at George and Kennedy, and most of the time, there's been so many shootings at George and Kennedy Northwest that they did have a stationary officer in a vehicle parked, just sitting there. It's somewhat of a deterrent, but not really. There was a homicide, a triple homicide, I think Kennedy and Longfellow doing last summer. And the police officer detail was right down the street at the carryout on Kennedy Street. It was even on the video, you could see the officer driving right into the block, which was a poor choice of his to drive right into the block after the shots were fired, because he pretty much drove right into the direct fire. And you could see the individuals running from out of the block that committed the homicide. Now, they did make arrest in that particular case, but the officer didn't really use good tactics when he did it. And a lot of times, after hearing those types of shots that close, the first thing you want to do is get to the scene, and you're not really thinking, you're driving straight to it. But the whole training process is so watered down, and with the defunding, that just gives them excuses not to train or not to do the appropriate thing. Now, obviously, when it comes to defunding, I'm not really for that. Reform, police reform, I'm for that. Now, reform, that's basically when you start to have some training and you trying to change the philosophies and some of the negative aspects of law enforcement that they've been doing for years, as far as the racially profiling and things of that nature. And that stuff still goes on, but again, they don't teach that in the academy. There is no in-service training on that. And I left in 2019, unless it suddenly changed. There is no training on, hey, you can't pull him over because he's in this type of car. You need an actual violation. They don't tell you that. Once you get out of the academy and things of that nature, you get the basics in the academy, they tell you a lot of times you can't assume because an individual, they should tell you this, but you can't assume because an individual lives in a bad neighborhood that the individual's got dope on him or a gun. You can't do that. You can't assume because an individual is standing on a corner in his neighborhood, because in some neighborhoods, individuals 15, 20 deep stand and talk. That's just normal. Somebody might have a beer, maybe they might be smoking weed or whatever, but it's not necessarily a gang activity. It's not necessarily drug activity per se, where it's open air drug mob. Certain neighborhoods and certain cultures, people hang out like that. You might see a grill out front on the sidewalk. But if you're not from this area and you have no knowledge of the culture and what people do and what people don't do and things like that, you're gonna just be totally clueless. And a lot of times, a lot of these officers are clueless. You can see the fear in their faces when the people start yelling and screaming. Like, look, as long as they screaming or whatever, it's not really bothering you. They can say what they want to say, but a lot of officers get hostile. If you just know how to talk to them and build a rapport with people, but they don't train you that way. It's not done. And I've discussed it. I've brought it up doing some of the in-service trainings that I've had. I've wrote, and a lot of times after in-service training, there's a survey, and you get to write on a survey. I was one of the ones that actually wrote, this could do this, or why don't we do this or do that? It never happened. Honestly, I don't even know if they read it, but I have reached out to try to attempt to find out, not necessarily that I wanted to be a violence interrupter. I wanted to know what they do and what are the qualifications and how are they picked? No response. I wanted to find out as far as this police board that looks into law enforcement as far as what changes. I did find those individuals online, and I looked at all of them, and they are handpicked. And it's a situation, like I said, last time I looked at it was a commander. She's on there, and I don't understand, how can you have a commander from the Metropolitan Police Department on the police oversight committee? That just doesn't make sense. Now, I would be on there. I have no problem being on there because I don't have the police interests at hand. I don't really necessarily have the citizens at hand. I have what's right and wrong at hand. Now, obviously, if it's some situation that's biased, like you are not having African American liaison, for example, or any other liaison for ethnicity that's not represented, how are you gonna have an LGBT liaison but you don't have an African American liaison, or any other ethnicity or race that's not represented? What makes LGBT more necessary than African American? I feel like if you got an LGBT, you got a Hispanic liaison, you got an Asian liaison unit down in Chinatown or what have you, why don't you have an African American liaison? And often you have some of the most significant problems with law enforcement and African Americans. Obviously, the relationship is challenging at times. Why not have an African American liaison? That can maybe come out. You have a situation where officers can come out and do the same thing as they do. Obviously, you got a language barrier sometimes. There might be a situation in Hispanic or Latino culture or our Asian culture. You have an Asian officer respond and talk and speak. Now, obviously, you have a situation where there's a situation with African American male, and there's a situation where it might be a little hostile. You have an officer come out that's level headed. They can come out and say, hey, look, man, just calm down. The officer just responded here. This is why your people are locked up. He had a warrant, misdemeanor warrant for no permit, no driver's license. It's likely a traffic offense. He should be out tomorrow. Something just when you calm and you can kind of understand the slang and the dialect, it will help. But a lot of times with the whole defunding the situation, they don't even give that thought. They weren't really giving it thought before defunding, but without the training and the whole defund movement, you're pretty much getting what you're getting now. You got officers doing absolutely nothing. And they tell you, I'm not doing anything. In the actual figure of speech with the whole defunding and cancel culture for the police, but a lot of officers say, look, I'm just going to chase the radio. And what that basically means is they're only answering radio calls for service. That means that if there is a individual that they know. For example, you got individuals on your beat. If you know your beat, certain individuals are known for certain things. There's certain individuals that are theft from auto guys. Certain people that was on my patrol area, I knew they were theft from auto guys. I know this dude is a crackhead. I know this dude is a burglar. He goes in buildings because they have been locked up numerous times. Obviously, if they're not doing anything, you can't just randomly stop them. But obviously, we drive past and good police tactics. You look in the rearview mirror and you drive past an individual and he turns around. He's watching where you go. I can see him in the rearview mirror. He wants to know where that police car is going. Now, of course, that's nervous energy. Can you turn around and stop him just because he followed the police car to see, or he peeped like this to see where the police car turned? No. But you can make a swing right back around that block and see. You can make contact with him. You can talk to him. Tell him, come here. Hey, man, what's up? How you doing? Individuals like that a lot of times will reveal their intent. You'll see the nervous injury. You ask the guy's name. He'll be like, man, why are you effing with me? I just asked you what was your name. I'm just trying to address you by your name. Why you effing with me? Things like that. But now you don't have any of that. Some guys actually know. Some guys might have a gun on them or a knife, but they just don't even want to be bothered with it. I know it's their job. It's actually, if you know for a fact that the individual is in possession of a weapon or has committed a crime and you don't take action, it's actually failure to take police action. You can actually be arrested and fired for that. And you got a lot of officers that tell you straight up, and they don't tell the citizens this. Of course, I have knowledge of it. So that's why I do these videos to share with people, because this isn't going to be on the news. They're not going to ever tell you this. They're going to tell you things that are the furthest from the truth sometimes. And you'll get the chief on and some of the high-ranking commanders. And they typical like politicians. Some of the stuff is true, some of it is lies. I've seen stuff on TV that I know is lies. And a lot of times, when it comes down to statistics, that's a whole nother ballgame, and I'll eventually discuss that. Those a lot of times are lies, and I've actually seen situations where certain officials have actually changed statistics as far as classifications of crimes. For example, they would make a felony a misdemeanor just so that it wouldn't reflect in their specific patrol service area to make their crime look high. So it's a lot of dirt that goes on. I'm just here to get people to subscribe. Like I said, this is not a monetary thing where I'm looking to get 1 million followers or whatever. And like I said, somebody reached out to me before, said, why don't you have more followers than you do? Well, I'm not really talking stupid. I'm not cursing. I try to do these videos without profanity. So if it's something you want to watch with your child, I'm not going to say anything disrespectful. I'm not going to be cursing. I'm not going to say anything ignorant. I'm just going to speak my truth and give you my perspective of it. Whereas a lot of individuals do all types of silly things for likes, and that's not me. I'm not from the social media era per se, and I do these just to try to get a voice, help people to understand why certain things go on as far as within the law enforcement culture, and not just the law enforcement culture, any particular subject. This is something that I'm going to discuss a lot of different things, and this is a very significant subject because you got so many individuals now. It's kind of died down somewhat with the whole defunding the police thing. It's not as popular right now until another situation happens, and I don't wish for another George Floyd situation, but it's going to happen. It's going to be another unarmed shooting or something like that, because you have individuals in these academies that are not properly trained. A lot of these individuals, I hate to say it, are scared of their shadows. A lot of these individuals have never, ever worked in urban areas or hostile environments, so you're going to get that. And a lot of individuals that could work in these areas, that are familiar with these areas, won't work because they're listening to, quote unquote, what's cool and what's not. It's not cool to be a police. You know what I'm saying? That's you're a sellout. I've heard all that stuff. No matter what, it never affected my paycheck. I heard it all. Individuals, F you, man. You hot. F you. You a sellout. Okay. You're in handcuffs. I gotta search you. I don't go back and forth. He's upset or she's upset, cursing me out. You're supposed to expect that, and you're supposed to be able to handle it, because this is an individual, you just taking their freedom. You have the authority to take someone's freedom, kill them, and injure them, and do all types of things. It's one of the most powerful occupations that exists. You literally, and this is not something you do it for, but you have the ability to take someone's freedom. You have the ability to do physical harm to someone if necessary. You have the ability and authority to kill someone. Now, obviously that should be something that's justified and a last result. You don't go in it with that mindset. Of course, there are all types of other perks. Yes, you can run red lights and do all types of stuff like that if you choose to. Some officers do it. Some officers, when I say do it, they're doing it in scout cars just because they don't want to sit at the light. That's something, you shouldn't do. It's unprofessional. And nowadays with the red light cameras and the speeding cameras, a lot of times officers can't do these things because if you do get a red light camera and you're not on an assignment or speeding violation with the photo radar, you will be held accountable for that, and you'll have to provide a activity sheet, which is your run sheet. And if you're not on a code 1 run, meaning a emergency call for service, you got to explain why you passed that red signal. Of course, you can make up something and say, I saw something suspicious, or I saw a car that took off at a high rate of speed. Yeah, that's cool, but then they ask, why didn't you come over the radio with it? Is there any transmission? Do you have anything on your run sheet? And obviously not. There's nothing on your run sheet that explains that. So that becomes a problem. But I wanted to discuss this whole reform, defund the police, because it kind of died down some, but the whole defund, it's actually showing the effects of it now. Now they did, obviously, they did not get a police department. The money, it's no telling when they'll get another raise. But they don't have currently enough members. You'll see a lot of times the union, the DC Police Department's union on TV, on the news, a lot of times talking about the crime and the statistics. That's not exaggeration. They really are not exaggerating. There is a very thin amount of police officers on the department, and more are retiring because COVID and just the climate. Why would you stay if you don't have to? It's not worth it. You can't get off. A lot of times with every time you look at something going on in DC. Now, back in the day, every now and then you had a protest, big protest, but now, because of legal situations, you can go down there and get a permit to protest at any given time. They're not going to turn you down because it's a form of discrimination. Now, if you want to go down there and say, look, we're the atheists, we're against this or that, or skateboarders are against so-and-so, it could be skateboarders or anything, snowboarders, we're against the climate change, anything like that, they're going to give you a permit because it's going to be a form of discrimination if they pick and choose who they give permits to. Obviously, if you are a violent, well-known group for violence and something like that, obviously they're going to take you through some changes. But what I'm saying is there's a protest just about every single weekend that you don't even know about. It doesn't make the news. They had something not too long ago. It was a while back. I think I was still in the department then. Janitors for Justice. Guess what? When that, as far as the intelligence comes, leave is restricted for that weekend. So if you don't already have leave in, you're not going to get it. And a lot of times people don't have the time frame to put in their leave in advance, because if you don't have the amount of leave to cover that period, you can't put it in. It's denied. You must have that amount of leave at that time to take off. So it's a tricky situation, and there's nothing worse than being at work when you don't really want to, or when you have an event like a party or somebody's getting married or vacation. You can't do that because you can't get the whole week off because there's a protest coming in. A lot of these leave books, because of the current climate and the lack of manpower, some of the book, as far as the leave book, the days off are already restricted, and you have no knowledge what's going on. You look like, well, why is it leave restricted? I'm trying to go somewhere in June. Oh, and that's so-and-so protesters coming to town, or we got the so-and-so coming in, Black Lives Matter movement, or one of their this groups is coming, and you don't have any knowledge of it. They don't share that type of intelligence with you. They know about it, and they mark the leave book up, and a lot of times it's like a very, very small percentage of people that can take leave. And a lot of times with the people, and I'm just being brutally honest, the people that work in administrative upstairs, a lot of times will already have knowledge of this, and they'll put, their names on the leave book, or they'll tell people that they have good rapport with, hey, look, you might want to put some leave in because it's only 2 spots left on the book for midnights. 2 slots. So obviously they tell somebody, and you don't have any knowledge of this. You're not in the in crowd, so you don't get a chance to put your leave in. The next thing you know, you find out, somebody's getting married, or there's an engagement for one of your children or something like that. You can't make it because they tell you the leave book is full. So at that point, you don't have anything actually you can do but to go sick or call in with an emergency. A lot of people, unfortunately, like any occupation, they abuse the leave. You had, I'm not going to obviously call the person's name, but we had an individual officer, a female officer. Actually, I think her grandparents died like about 10 times. She would always call that grandparents passed or whatever. And, it's a touchy situation, so a lot of sergeants and officials didn't really question that, because that's a touchy situation. When you start questioning somebody's situation and they say somebody passed, you don't have to have actual program from a funeral or anything like that. It's not like that. So it's a tricky situation. But everybody and their mother knew that she was abusing the situation, and she had like a zero balance of leave. So obviously when she took off, she didn't get paid. Now, hey, teach his own. But I just wanted to discuss it. The whole reform thing is a wonderful concept if it was applied properly and you started to actually do some real reform and change some of the actual practices that have been going on for years, and start treating people like humans. You know what I'm saying? You're going to have some officers that obviously are bad. You're going to have some negative situations where the officers are totally at fault. But, you can't just defund the whole law enforcement agency or a police department simply because of that. I mean, come on now. That's just like with doctors. If individuals really knew and did some research and found out on some of the malpractice lawsuits of individuals actually amputating the wrong leg or actually doing medical procedures in the situations where they weren't even supposed to, and somehow they got them mixed up. Obviously, you don't counsel doctors, or you don't counsel a whole medical industry because some medical doctors screw ups. You wouldn't do that. You shouldn't do that for law enforcement. Now, if an officer does something irresponsible and it costs someone their life, then obviously they need to be dealt with. And a lot of problems that I have, like I said, I'm unbiased. There's a situation, and if you have a chance, and I got no problem speaking on this, there's a shooting that took place, I believe, on Queen Street. I'm not sure. I believe it's Queen Street, Northeast or Southeast in Washington, D.C. Now, I would encourage anybody that's watching this video to Google it. The Metropolitan Police Department did submit the video, the body-worn camera, or what, if you want to call that video footage, you call it what you want to call it. But I would invite anybody that's watching this to, at your own convenience, check that video out. Now, this is a situation that I really, really thought was going to really, really, really blow up, because it doesn't look, it looks a little awkward. There was an individual that supposedly officers went to do a stay away order or something in reference to a domestic situation. The individual wanted to get some clothes, and the female was there, and somehow a disagreement ensued. And to make a long story short, the individual was shot in the back twice. Now, I said, I'm not biased. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that the officers were justified simply because they're Metropolitan Police Department officers. What I saw in the video just was a little weird to me, because it's not really a video. Now, according to, I think the chief, and what was said was the body-worn cameras fell off and hit the ground and somehow stopped working. Now, I've been carrying the camera since they came out before I retired. I've never had my camera cut off by itself. I was surprised that that didn't really turn into a major situation, because personally, this is just my opinion, it just didn't sound right. Shot in the back twice. Now, allegedly, this individual on Queen Street attempted to get the officer's weapon. There's no footage of that. None. Unless somehow they put some more footage on there. I watched the footage multiple times. Now, I don't know what happened because I wasn't there. But you're supposed to activate that camera every time you go to an assignment or have an interaction with the citizen. They had the assignment, so the cameras were supposedly on. If I'm not mistaken, there were a total of 3 officers on that scene, and somehow the footage didn't come up. Supposedly the cameras fell off. That wasn't blown up. I didn't see the Black Lives Matter movement or any other agency, or I didn't see Ben Crump, Al Sharpton, and all these individuals pop up. Obviously, a lot of times, this is just my opinion, whenever there's a police case, you'll see them because there's generally some financial resources at the end of that rainbow. Now, you're not going to see them at an average shooting, or you won't see them at a shooting of a child or a baby get a stray bullet. It's not really a whole lot of, it's not money to be made. So, and it's not going to be a whole lot of publicity. But anytime there's a law enforcement situation, obviously that's easy money, because in most cases, the police department, if the officer's wrong, is going to settle out of court. There won't be a trial. So Ben Crump or any type of other attorney won't really have any whole lot of leg work to do other than get on TV and say, this is wrong, we're not going to take it anymore, and then sit around for a little while. Then there'll be another shooting a couple of months later, and then they'll do the same thing and get paid. And it's just an easy payday, And I don't knock anyone's hustle, but I will point out a hustle when I see one, So my thing is, with this whole situation on Queen Street, if you have a chance, and if the video's still there, because it kind of like went away, they kind of like, for whatever reason, don't ask me why, the citizens of Washington, D.C. didn't really question that. Me, after watching it, it didn't look right to me. Now, maybe, I'm not saying that the shooting wasn't justified. I don't know what the outcome was, but what I saw on video, and I watched the video multiple times, it took place on Queen Street. So, I guess you could Google Queen Street, individual shot in the back twice. Now, you know what? I won't even really go into it, but I would encourage anybody that's watching me right now, get us some time. Just Google the shooting on Queen Street, and if you got some comments, you're welcome to send me some comments in the comment area, what have you. But I just found it a little bit odd, because I've dropped my camera. I've dropped it many times, and it never, ever turned off. The camera actually is easier to turn on than turn off. You have to hold the camera to turn it off, the button on the middle, and you can turn it off all the way, but it's a switch on the top of it. But that means the camera will have to fall in a very, very, very exact way to hit that switch to turn it totally off. And obviously, to stop it from recording, you got to hold the button in. So what could the camera have fell on where it held the button and just in the middle of the camera? It's just, it doesn't add up. There was another case, and some of you guys may not remember this, where an individual officer shot a gentleman on a motorcycle. Now, from what I understand, the guy was kind of taunting the police or being reckless with the motorcycle. However, regardless, he's unarmed. You can't shoot him. So it's my understanding, or at least this is what the officer said, that the individual tried to ram the door shut on the officer or something like that, so he shot him. Either way, he's on a motorcycle, and like I said, I call it, like I said, to a lot of officers that might watch this, somebody like, man, I can't believe you're doing this. You used to be an officer. You a sellout, man. You talking against the police. No, I'm just talking reality. If it's a legitimate situation where the officer has a legitimate reason to shoot, I have nothing to say, but hey, it's unfortunate, but what was the officer supposed to do? You pulled the gun out. The officer didn't know you was going to throw the gun. Yeah, you say you was trying to get rid of the gun, but you pulled the gun out of your waist, man, when you could have just put your hands on top of your head, take the loss, take the L, go to jail for the gun. And the way the DC is prosecuting, you'll likely have the case no paper or be right back on the street before the officer can finish the paperwork. That's just reality. Sad, but it's reality. But I would encourage individuals to watch that video. But back to the situation with the motorcycle, shot the guy and killed him on a motorcycle. Now, there was a settlement. I don't recall how much it was. Regardless of what the settlement was for, it's not enough money to replace a human life. The parents got the money, and depending on their spending habits, and when you get that kind of money, all types of family leeches pop up, and if you don't know what you're doing, that money is gone before the year is out. You can't replace him, but it's my understanding that the individual was allowed to resign. He wasn't prosecuted, and he wasn't terminated. It's my understanding he was allowed to resign. Now, if you're allowed to resign, a lot of times you have you can get another job, and you can get another job in law enforcement depending on where you go. So it's just something to look into. The Queen Street, and you can also look up the situation with the shooting of the motorcycle, the individual on the motorcycle that was unarmed. But for whatever reason, it's just kind of weird to me how forgetful sometimes the citizens are. And I'm sitting here bringing it up, and I'm a former police officer. I'm, obviously retired, but I'm human, and that could have been me on the motorcycle. Like I tell anybody, because I did it for a living, doesn't stop me from being profiled, doesn't stop me from being black. I'm still black. I still did the job, with professionalism. If you were black and you were wrong and I couldn't talk to you and calm you down, it was a situation where I couldn't diffuse, you went to jail. I didn't care about you being black, white, or whatever. I didn't discriminate. Now, obviously, regardless, if it's a situation I can diffuse, hey, look, man, get your boy, you know what I'm saying? You screaming like, nah, I'm going to get this dude. You continuing to try to fight or what have you. Not a whole lot I can do. You putting on a show for all the ladies. Hey, we're going to cuff you. I don't really want to do the paperwork if it's obviously at 4 o'clock in the morning, clubs that night, because we getting off at 6. But that means a lot of times I'm going to be stuck. And depending on if, back then, if the individual doesn't make a citation, meaning if he has something pending, that means he's a lockup. I got to go to court. I'm not going home. That means I have to go to court. Now it's a little different. You can do the online papering, and that's why a lot of the officers basically don't do nothing now. They have no knowledge or working knowledge to actually write out a proper narrative or testify, because a lot of these cases don't even go to trial, So a lot of these officers have never even experienced sitting on a stand for 2 to 3 hours straight, being questioned by a defense's attorney, cross-examined, and then get off the stand for a break for lunch, and then get right back on that stand after lunch and continue cross-examine. I've testified as an expert witness. I know what it's like. Been there, done that. It's not a whole lot once you do it on a regular basis. Obviously the first time, you got a good defense attorney questioning you, and they got an attitude with you. Well, it's not really an attitude, but they're trying to basically get you to come unrattled, talking trash to you. Well, hey, Officer Fair, I don't even believe you were even working that night. So, I'm looking at this guy like, this dude is crazy. In my mind, so I'm not getting rattled. There are a lot of things as training that they don't teach you now. Like a lot of officers twitch on the stand, they're rocking forth, nervous energy. Some officers even get on the stand with gum, chewing gum, things that you're not supposed to do. You're supposed to sit in a very erect position, and you obviously make eye contact with the jury and the judge as you're testifying. That makes it a little more personal. These are things that you learn as you testify. They don't teach this in the academy anymore. I don't know what they teach in the academy. Most of the academy training is repetitive, and that's why you have a lot of situations with the officers now. A lot of times they'll teach something after something happens. It's a more reactive police department with training versus, hey, look, we need to do this, we need to change this. They haven't changed with the times. And because of there is a lack of manpower, even at the police academy, you don't get proper training. And once the in-service training starts, it starts off real well with the training. And then once it gets midway of the year, you stop having individuals show up. You got a lot of downtime. People that were supposed to come speak don't show up. A lot of times you might have someone that normally comes from another agency, but as the time goes into the middle of the year, you got 2 or 3 hours of downtime because the person that was going to speak on this particular situation didn't show up. So obviously you get credit for being there, but it's basically just a same waste of time. Active shooting, the active shooter class, the CPR, every other year, how to apply tourniquet, things like that, which is always good to have, but there's so much training that needs to be had as far as professionalism, how to talk to a citizen, how to diffuse a situation properly. These individuals have no clue whatsoever. But I want to wrap it up. And a lot of times, like I said, I can go on forever. And if you find yourself, like, obviously you might have something, you might have better watch this whole video one time. Just write down, I guess, the time frame where you stopped at and go to that time frame and start again. But I just wanted to go into the whole defund reform. I'm for reform, but defunding, like I said, it's having this effect right now. And they have not had the proper budget to put the officers in place that they need. And they said a lot of officers, unfortunately, after the academy, even though you have to pay back $5,000 if you leave within a certain amount of time. A lot of the other agencies are paying it for the officers to come to their jurisdiction. It's like, wow, you just came out of the DC Police Academy, Metropolitan Police Department DC. We'll take you and we'll pay for that $5,000. So once some of these guys get on the street, they haven't heard gunshots, that are from some of these rural areas where the only shots they heard is in the woods hunting. When they hear a fully automatic go off in DC, a lot of them are like, you know what? I didn't sign up for this. I quit. This is not for me. And obviously, like, you see what type of caliber officers you have now with the whole situation from the Capitol. You had officers quitting. One officer is trying to pursue a movie deal. He was just so ecstatic about how somehow he got kidnapped, and that's a whole subject that I talked about before. He supposedly got kidnapped in full uniform, beaten, tased, and knocked unconscious for, I forget, he said how many minutes. Now, I don't know how you know the minutes you got knocked out unless you got another officer counting like in a fight, or unless you really weren't knocked out or you just exaggerate. But he actually resigned, the officer I'm referring to. I forgot his name. I would call his name because it doesn't really matter to me in this particular situation, because quitting is just not if it's not for you, I get it, but in my era, quitting is just not acceptable. That's the easiest thing you can do in life, is quit. And I'm just not about it. Try not to even use that whole terminology. I try not to even use the term quit. But look, I'm going to wrap it up. Defunding, I'm totally against it. Obviously, the people that pay the price are the citizens. Reform is needed big time. I don't honestly see it happening because I've reached out. I've actually tried to reach out as far as the violence interrupters. I wanted to know what they do. What are the qualifications? This is something maybe I was looking into. Just find out what they do. No response. Those people are handpicked. I wanted to find out the police reform committee, or the oversees the Metropolitan Police Department, as far as what they do. I emailed Charles Allen. No response. I emailed the actual committee. No response. And I looked at all the individuals named, and they're individuals that are handpicked. And I did find out, I believe they're handpicked from the mayor and Charles Allen. So that's pretty much a buddy system. They gave some people, and I don't think they get paid, but they basically put them in place just to say that, hey, look, we did something. And as far as the whole situation, they're basically doing nothing. Like I said, they're not going to talk like I'm talking. For the most part, I'll tell you straight up from experience. And there's one MPD officer on there that supposedly retired from 380. I've never seen this dude in my life. I don't know who he is. I've contacted some people that to see who he is. They don't even know who he is. But supposedly he's a retired, older Metropolitan Police Department guy that's on the committee. And I did watch a video with him on it, but it's very unprofessional. I was on a Zoom call, and he was eating and chewing. Just seemed like he was just disinterested in everything that was going on. So I was like, okay, this guy, I can't take him serious. He's not even paying attention to what's going on in the Zoom call. So put some comments in the thing if you got some questions. And I got some more topics that'll be coming up real soon. And subscribe, like, share. I'm not doing this for monetary. I'm just trying to bring some light to the situation and enlighten some individuals and you guys on what you're not going to see on the news, especially if you are in DC. Now, I can't really speak on other law enforcement agencies because I'm not there, but I will say PG County is extremely thin. And if you've been watching the news, there's just as many homicides in PG County there as in DC. At one point, if you lived in PG County, it was elite, but the defunding and the counseling of law enforcement and just the lack of interest in the occupation has become a pandemic in itself. And DC this summer, and I welcome anybody to come back on here once we get into the summer and drop a comment, say you were right. You were absolutely right. It's going to be a problem this summer because a lot of officers have already put their paperwork in for the Metropolitan Police Department to retire. Because it's just too much with the whole COVID situation. And I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to let you guys go. There's a situation with the COVID. And a lot of times, if you get COVID and somebody was around you, technically they're supposed to, stay off for a while. And what's been going on, to my understanding, is a lot of officers say that they were around an officer that has tested positive COVID. Now, mind you, they don't have any symptoms or anything like that, and in most cases, they don't even test positive. So I don't know if this has changed, but that's some time off the quarantine. So a lot of officers were taking off, even if they don't have any symptoms. Hey, look, man, I rode with him just for an hour. I dropped him off at court. So, you know, he tested positive for COVID. Now you got to quarantine. So that's administrative leave. You don't have to use your leave. I don't know how many days. Obviously, first it was 10 days. Then it's shortened to 5 days. It might be 2 days. Now, who knows? But the officers, some, I won't say all, some officers were using that as a way to get off. And, you know, it happens. You're going to have abuse in any situation wherever there's a form to get over. You're going to have some officers that's going to get over. But look, defund, totally against it. Reform the police, it's extremely needed. But honestly, I don't see it happening. I don't see it being a real focus or hot topic now with the mayor. You don't even see the mayor in certain parts of the city. For the most part, her revenue and her real financial support is on the ends that you see her in. You won't see her for the most part on the south side or southeast or in some of the harder areas of the city. You know, and you can speak on other situations, like for example, Marion Barry. He had his issues with the situation and all that. But one thing I can say about him, he had no problem coming to Southeast. He actually lived in Southeast, but he had no problem coming to South. And a lot of people say, oh, he was a criminal and all that. And that's a whole nother scenario. But I'm not going to really get into that. But one thing about him, he came to all of the areas. Now, some people obviously in Northwest didn't care for him, but a lot of people in the lower income areas and in areas like that cared about him because he was a down-to-earth individual. He wasn't looking down on you. He didn't turn his nose up on you once he got elected. He would still come and do things, and he guaranteed every youth a summer job. Now, that worked for me because I didn't believe it. I was like, man, you telling this dude going to guarantee me a job every year? And I worked at some youth employment every year and bought my school clothes. Man, it was good days. But look, I'm gone. I'll have some more topics coming soon, but look into that video on Queen Street, that police shooting where an individual was shot in the back twice. And allegedly, supposedly he tried to take the officer's gun, but there's no video footage of that. And if you want to research the incident where MPD officer killed a gentleman on a motorcycle, unarmed. Now, obviously, there was no training for that, but that's just pretty much a common sense thing. I don't know what triggered him to shoot the individual on the motorcycle, but obviously, these are training issues. You have a lot of scary officers out there now, and the whole defund will affect training, and it's affecting training. They're already training, as I said before, was watered down, but the defunding, it has some real negative effects. It sounds good, you know, scream defund the police department, but when you got an officer in your neighborhood going crazy on you because he doesn't understand that you're just upset your friend just got locked up and he's, you know, abusing you physically with excessive force because he wasn't properly trained or has no scenarios where citizens come in and play a role where a citizen is upset, and these officers don't experience this until they actually get on the street. And I've mentioned this before, there should be scenarios where you have some citizens come in or have some officers role play where they're hostile, they're upset, they're screaming, they're cursing, so these officers can experience this before getting out of the academy. Guess what? That doesn't happen. So when they get to these neighborhoods and you get some people that are hostile with the police, they don't know what to do. They're scared. So a lot of times they're so scared, what's the next best thing? Pull that gun, point that gun, and if you come close to them or whatever, they shoot. You might not be armed or anything, but they're in fear of their life, as they say. How can you be in fear of your life? The individual didn't have a gun. All he was doing was cursing and screaming at you and approaching. You should have never pulled your gun, but whole nother subject, but that's where we are as far as law enforcement is concerned, and it's going to get a whole lot worse as far as violence in Washington, D.C. because the Metropolitan Police Department is running on fumes. Okay, y'all? I'm gone.